Hey, this is Lee Balcom. So let's assume that your marriage is in trouble because, frankly, I don't think you would be watching any of my videos if that were not the case. So let's assume that that's the case. And let's say that you wanted to get help for your marriage and you have some questions about how that might happen. And the reason I say this is because just this morning, I actually had a back-to-back kind of a phone call and then an email. And it was almost the opposite ends of the question. So one person in an email said, hey, I want to do marital therapy, but I can't get my spouse to agree with it. Is it possible for me to do marital therapy by myself? So then the other person who was communicating with me had another question, kind of the opposite. Hey, I'm really interested in doing relationship coaching, some marriage coaching with you. And I know that you work with people by themselves, but is it possible for you to see both of us, my spouse and me? So interestingly, they're coming at this very different approach of can one or two people do therapy and can two or one person do coaching? And so let me kind of clear up some conceptions or misconceptions about what can happen in therapy and what can happen in coaching. So the reason I bring that up is because this is kind of my world, has been my world for a long time. I'm trained as a marriage and family therapist. Also, I was trained as an individual therapist. And so I did all of the training to work with individuals, with couples, with families along the way. And I specialized in looking at a systems approach of how you're integrated into the system around you, including in your marriage and in your family. And so what my intention was to work with mostly couples. And here's kind of what happened along the way. I like to do the best I can in whatever I'm doing. It's one of my things, but I'm also maybe a bit of a skeptic at heart. And so I always hold things a bit suspect. It's like, okay, I hear what you're saying. Now prove it to me. So here's what happened. Through all the training, I am working with couples. I'm getting supervised and I'm not liking the outcomes. So I start doing some research. Here I am working. I've got 2 masters at this point. I'm involved in my PhD work, had been doing supervised therapy for many years at that point. And so the question was, what are the rates of improvement based on marriage therapy? Now, there are what people will kind of throw around out there, and then there's what the research shows. Here's what the research actually showed me. About half of couples who go to therapy still end up divorced. About half. Does that statistic ring familiar to you? Because in the United States, that's about the basic rate of divorce in marriages in general. In other words, to go to a therapy didn't do much to avert the process going forward. Not only that, but only 10 to 15%, and that's based on different studies, said that the marriage therapy helped them at all. Now, this research has stayed fairly consistent. That doesn't mean there aren't great therapists out there and there aren't great approaches out there. But overall, there are problems in how we do therapy. And I've talked about this in other videos already, but it basically boils down to 3 things in therapy. First of all, you have to have a therapist who actually has a clear training in marital therapy. Clear training, not they went to a weekend seminar, which is what happens to some, not they read some books, which happens to a lot, and they're basically trained as individual therapy, and they realized that they were seeing couples, and so they decided they were doing couple therapy, and they never recognized that there's actually a huge theoretical shift that you have to have in how you understand therapy going forward. So that's the first problem that many people get. They get an individual therapist who says they do couples therapy, and they don't realize that the client is the relationship, not one of the 2 people in the room, but the relationship. So that's the first big issue. The second big issue is the theory base they use. So some of those therapists who even went and did training then don't use the therapy the theory they were taught. And there's some good theories out there. Okay, so it's a theory problem. But let me go one step further. And this is something that I've been talking about more and more recently as I've become clear of how to conceptualize this. All of the books, and you can see there are a number of books that I've written that also do this, but many books don't take the next step, which I try to do in my books, of what do you do? Because they have theories of what happened, right? Lots of theories out there of why your marriage is in trouble. So if you read a book on marriage, a lot of it is going to be why you got into trouble. In reality, I can break it down pretty simply. I've done that in other videos, but this whole big, sometimes very convoluted theories of why you're in trouble doesn't tell you how to get out, because it's not a matter of how you got there, but the systems you put in place to get you to a better place, because your systems are broken. And your systems are broken because of the disconnection that's happened. And the disconnection happened because often you hit the pause button and didn't realize it. So the theory base is a problem for many people. Their therapist doesn't have a clear theory base of how to move forward. And here's the big one. Many times they do have the theory base. They just default to something else and they don't even use the material. So people often say, what do you think about therapists that are trained in this method? Method, I'm likely to approve of. There's some great ones out there. The training, though, doesn't mean that's what they do. Many therapists just kind of default to other approaches. So are there good therapists out there? Absolutely. Are all marital therapists they're capable of helping you? Absolutely not. Research shows it. Okay, and then there's the third issue. And that is a client issue. In order for marriage therapy to work, it takes two people who are ready to move forward. I didn't say that they were signing on the dotted lines, that they're going to save their marriage and they're going to stay married no matter what, but they're willing to move forward and try to solve it. What often happens is one person feels like they are kind of coerced, pulled, shamed, forced into going to therapy. They don't want to be there. They're not ready to work on things. That could change down the road unless they're forced to be there. So they're not wanting to work on things. So what happens? They resist. Many people would say to me, can you convince my spouse to work on this? No, I can't. Neither can any other therapist, no matter how good they are. So that's the truth. You need to have a spouse and you who are ready to walk forward and work on your relationship. If you're not, you're going to sabotage it without recognizing. That's those three big things that I see get in the way many times. Okay, so then comes this question, well, what if my spouse doesn't want to go to therapy? Can I go by myself? You can go to individual therapy by yourself. You can do that. You can't do marital therapy by yourself. You cannot. You can go work on the issues and learn why you're acting and reacting the way you are, learn some new coping skills, do lots of stuff in individual therapy. But you can't do marital therapy unless both of you are there. Okay, so to be clear. Okay, so let's talk about the next piece of coaching, because that's where I pivoted to. I want you to just for a moment imagine this. My wife and I, at that point, were married with two young toddling kids in our house. And I was writing a dissertation, and we were in a house that was very small. So small that we had a fireplace, non-functional fireplace, old fireplace, at one end of our kind of bigger living area, the living room. And that's where my desk was to write my dissertation. Didn't have anywhere else to put it. So my desk was there, piles of books everywhere, as you can imagine. I mean, just all the research I was doing and all this work I was doing to write my dissertation. And my dissertation was looking at what are the challenges and problems in therapy, me being the skeptic, and what are the other possibilities. So I'm reading and looking at different ways of doing it. And I'm reading this article in a magazine that is about this new profession. Now, this would have been back in the mid-90s, long 1990s, mid 1990s. Don't go too far back, but mid 1990s. So last century, right? And there was this new profession that was life coaching. And I was reading an article that was based on these very early pioneers in the coaching movement who were talking about how they do their job. And I read it and I turned to my wife and I said, this is what I do. This is how I do therapy. This is how I've evolved into therapy. By the way, she's also a therapist. And she said, well, what are you going to do about that? Here I am, knee deep in a dissertation, trying to wrap up a PhD, having done lots of training as a therapist. And here I'm saying, I think there might be an off-ramp that I need to take. What are you going to do? Well, my wife has always been very supportive. And so I don't know if she recognized it, but the next step was for me to enroll in a coach training program. Now, these days, I hate to say it, but many people claim to be a coach and they're a dime a dozen with very little training. Sometimes they get a certificate for, an online short course that they paid less than $100 for. Sometimes they've done a weekend thing. That's not what was involved when I started coach training. I was involved in a 2-year training program that was as intense as a master's program was. Lots of classes, lots of tests, lots of training, lots of just work. So I did a 2-year training. In fact, I had not even gotten my PhD in hand before I'd started that training. And so I went through all of that, realizing that there were possibilities here. And that part of what I loved about coaching is it allowed me to be more helpful to couples, but also to individuals who wanted to impact their marriage. That's what created what I talk about in this book, and actually what I talked about in my other books about how to move forward. Because that really is the thing, right? I mean, in the end, it's kind of a mental game of what you think might have happened in your marriage, right? It can be a nice exercise. We all want to know why we are who we are. And so you see that all the time these days. You read a book and you realize you're some point on the Enneagram, some type in a Myers-Briggs, some profile in a DISC profile from work, whatever it is, right? And we go, oh, I'm a blank, right? Therapy has given us that. It gives us an explanatory process of saying, this is who I am. Coaching is saying, but where do you want to go? Where do you want to go? And so part of the task of coaching is to make changes to where you want to get to build a new process. So many times in coaching, I've described it as finding the space between where you are and where you want to be and how to cross it. That's what coaching does. How do you cross that divide? How do you get past the gap and get to the place you want to be? Sometimes therapy is more about helping you understand why you've been doing what you've been doing, but doesn't give you a ramp to get somewhere else. Not always. So part of what I did is I took the coaching approach and applied it to working with couples and applied it with helping people improve their relationship. So that meant that I was suddenly handed a big toolkit on how to help individuals transform their marriage by working on it by themselves. I had to find the pieces, put them together, but that's where that lands. And so part of the process that I bring into the Save the Marriage program is this coaching approach that can help people transform their marriage, even if only one want to. So one person can get into coaching with me, with my team of coaches, use my approaches as a coaching tool to get to where they want to get to, using my Save the Marriage system, learning how to get beyond affairs, learning why you might fail and how to avoid failure, learning how to thrive in life, how to forgive, how to thrive in other ways in your life. All of those are from a coaching approach. Now, that raises the second question. Can coaching work? Because many people have used me and my team as one person working for it. And they go, what if my spouse wants to be involved in this? Can it work? Not only can it work, but oh my gosh, the results of two people who join together in coaching when both are ready to move forward, transformational. So to answer the question, can two people, spouses, do coaching? Absolutely. So here is kind of one of those places where therapy, in my opinion, falls short. First of all, we have the statistics on what happens with therapy. Second is therapy requires two people to be working to move together to make progress. It doesn't require that to get into therapy, and that is a mistake, I think, of many therapists, to see somebody who's pulling in another person and watch them pull apart further. That's just human nature, that you're going to restate your position and more strongly hold to it if you feel like you have to defend your position. So if you're coming into therapy going, I don't really want to be here, you're going to prove why you don't want to be there. So you cannot do marital therapy with one person. You have to have both people, and they have to both want to move forward. That's a problem. Relationship coaching. Can we work with a couple? Absolutely. But here's the secret. We can also work with one person and have great capacity of change just with one person doing it, because we're doing relationship coaching on how they can change what happens in the relationship. So, what does that mean for you? Well, the first stop for me in my program is the Save the Marriage system. You can check that at savethemarriage.com. That's savethemarriage.com. And the reason that's the first step is because you need a basic platform for us to build from. So whenever I used to coach people who didn't have that basis, they would come to me and they'd just say, I don't want to have to read anything or learn anything, just coach it to me. We would have to spend session after session with me walking them through the basics. And so, first of all, very expensive. Second, not a good use of either of our time. It just doesn't help. And it also tells me something. If somebody's not willing to learn just the basics of what's happened and what to do, just the basic theory, that tells me they're not going to make good use of coaching. And so the first step is grabbing the system, savethemarriage.com. Then if you're interested in coaching and you have my system, you can check out the options at savethemarriage.com/coaching, savethemarriage.com/coaching. Okay. That will give you a good idea of how we have some coaching options for people. But let me let you in on a little secret, at least right now, at least while I'm making this video. My coaches have reserved some space at no additional charge that when you grab the system, once you do that, once you get to your download page, you will have access to a little questionnaire where you can submit information, and one of my coaches will contact you for a complimentary session, a get started session, to make sure that you launch in the right direction on moving forward. Now, that may be enough. For many people, the system and just that short get you started session is enough. But if you needed more help, they're available for that too. They can provide additional coaching. But the starting point is Save the Marriage. SaveTheMarriage.com. Grab the Save the Marriage system. Get started there. Coaching. SaveTheMarriage.com/coaching. But if you're grabbing the system, only available right after you've grabbed the system and you're getting started, you can also use that Get Started session. Relationship coaching can be transformational. One of the more powerful tools that I've seen as people go through the process. So back to the original question, can you do marital therapy by yourself? Absolutely not. Should you? I'm going to leave that to you to decide. Can you do coaching with both of you? Yes, and you can also do it by yourself. But get started first at savethemarriage.com. That's savethemarriage.com. This is Lee Balcom wishing you the best as you work to save your marriage.